Welcome everyone to the side event Waste-Free Mountains, or Keeping Our Mountains Waste-Free. We invite you to take a seat. It's going to be an exciting side event focusing on how we keep our mountain ecosystems clean from pollution, clean from plastic waste, from litter, and for us to enjoy in future generations. My name is Ansgar Fellendorf. I work as climate and mountain expert with the UN Environment Program, and it's a great honor to moderate this side event. So we already heard about the triple planetary crisis. So at UNEP we identified the climate crisis, biodiversity loss, and also pollution as important topics of our time. And it's really an honor, and we're thrilled to have true experts from the US and from around the world here and online. I can already see them online. So thank you for everyone who joins virtually in late hours or early hours. So great to have you here. We will focus on a global, regional, national, and local picture of waste, litter, plastics, and everything around it. So maybe to get started and to wake up a little bit, just a question to ask: what do you think, how many plastic bags are used a day in the Kathmandu Valley? So in Kathmandu Valley, there are around 5 million people, and there are 4.5 million plastic bags used every day, just to give a perspective of the scale. And another interesting fact maybe is a banana peel in a landfill, I read, takes about 10 days to decompose. And then in cold mountain environments, what do you think, how long does a banana peel need to decompose? So it's 2 years. So really, everything you throw away in the mountains needs longer to decompose. Before handing over to Björn Alfthan, we would also like to mention that we provide a solution box in the end at a table. It looks like this. So we invite you to, as you listen to the side event, write down on the piece of paper in front of you a solution that you think, what is the solution for the waste and litter crisis in mountains. And we also invite you to think about how the Mountain Partnership and its members can advocate for clean mountains and waste-free mountains. So as you listen to our experts, please take the time to note down some solutions and input to the Mountain Partnership and throw it in this solutions box. We will read it. Okay, so before handing over to Björn, it's also an honor to welcome all the partners of a recent effort for a policy brief on waste-free mountains that we drafted. We'll see the slide with the cover page for in the framework of the International Year of Sustainable Mountain Development. This was a joint effort led by GRID-Arendal, the Secretariat of the Basel, Rotterdam, and Stockholm Conventions, the Mountain Research Initiative, the UIAA, which is the International Federation for Mountaineering and Climbing, and the UN Environment Program. If we can put up the slide. This policy brief is fresh from the press, and it's our great honor to launch it officially today at the global meeting. You can read it at the resources page of GRID-Arendal. It has a lot of best practices, but also approaches on local, national, regional, international level for keeping our mountains waste-free. Without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce Björn Alfthan. He is principal expert at GRID-Arendal. He works on translating complex scientific results into understandable publications. So over to you.
Thank you, Ansgar. Do you know how I flip through the slides?
Just say next slide.
Okay, yeah, just to compliment what Ansgar said about the policy brief. It really is an accumulation of a lot of knowledge that we've worked on for the last 3 years or so, or more even, so highly recommend taking a look at it. Next slide, please. Yeah, so I'm going to be talking about painting the global picture and challenges to waste management in mountains. Waste management, well, waste is a big topic, includes industrial waste, mining, plastic waste, human waste. So we're not going to be covering all of these. We're mainly covering municipal waste and waste in remote regions. Next slide, please. Yeah, so just to start off, really, to paint the picture, well, the mountain regions of the world, I think the latest estimate, which is already outdated, is 1.1 billion people living in mountains. So there are certain areas of the world, mountain regions that are quite highly populated. The Alps, for example, the Andes, parts of Asia, and parts of Africa as well, and several other areas, of course. Next slide, please. And what's happened over the last 25 years is actually the population in most mountain regions has actually increased, and it's increased small amounts or big amounts. And what's happened actually is in this population increase, most people have actually moved. Well, the population increase has been more important in urban areas and in cities. So actually the share of mountain population living in cities or urban areas is now at 66%. It's still lower than lowlands, which is at 75%, but it's still significant and it's a majority. So most mountain people actually live in cities or urban areas, and this has an impact on waste and waste management. Next slide, please. So a feature of some parts of the world is that most of the high large population cities are actually not located in North America or in Europe, but they're actually in Africa, in Asia, and in Latin America. And these cities have been expanding quite significantly, many of them. And there's also many cities below 500,000 people in these areas as well. And the ability to manage waste is actually related quite closely to the income levels of countries. And so many of these countries have low income levels, so that has an impact on their ability to manage waste. Next slide, please. So what we found actually already several years ago, when we analyzed actually the waste management problems in mountainous cities, is actually the mountainness of these cities didn't really play such a significant role in determining how these cities manage waste. Instead, it's related to their level of the country's development. And this has an impact on, for example, the collection efficiency. That's expensive. Fewer financial resources means there's less ability. There's ability to build sanitary landfills. So whether you do that or you do open burning, and there's many factors that actually contribute to poor waste management. And so on this little graph here, you see that actually all countries in the world have mismanaged waste. Countries with high incomes also have mismanaged waste, but the levels in low-income countries tend to be higher, unfortunately. Next slide, please. So mountains are quite similar to lowlands in respect to their problems with waste management. But one aspect I think that really caused attention, why we should pay attention to this for mountains, is that they are located upstream, and generally there are rivers that connect the upstream to the downstream. And the research is showing actually that rivers are not only a conduit for plastics moving, mainly plastics because they're buoyant, moving to the oceans, but they are actually their own reservoir. So there is an interest, I think, for mountainous countries to be aware of their waste management problem, because it does contribute to lowland pollution, and plastic stays in rivers for a long time. Eventually it degrades, and then it will contribute to plastics in the oceans over decades. So it's a long-term problem, and it needs to be thought of now. Next slide, please. Yeah, just a few pictures. Kathmandu was already mentioned. These are just photos. We have a project in Kathmandu trying to divert plastics away from rivers and into more productive uses. So, I mean, it's not to say that plastics, for example, are not recycled. Many plastics are recycled. There's a lot of initiatives. The informal sector in many countries is very active, and the formal sector. But certain categories of plastics are not recycled because they have low value and they're not deemed as economically viable to collect, which is why we have situations where they're sort of dumped into rivers. Rivers also often public land. If there's a breakdown in collection services, it's quite convenient to people to dump by rivers. Rivers are also periodically flooded, And it's actually no surprise in a way that rivers are dumping grounds, because with flooding, it gets rid of it and it clears it. But of course, this is a problem for lowland areas. Next slide, please. So I just want to move to more remote areas and not talk about cities anymore. What we found when we were exploring this waste management problem is that we didn't have much data on waste management or waste problem in remote mountain regions. So last year we developed a survey together with the organizations you see the logos on this slide. So we had mountaineering federations, UIAA, we had the Guiding Federation, IFMGA, MRI, UIMLA, which is another guiding federation, Kilian Jornet Foundation, and UN partners, UN and the Basel Secretariat. And what we did was we sent this survey out through those networks to interested mountaineers. We had, of course, a bit of problem reaching certain areas. So Africa is underrepresented, Asia to a certain extent. So, you have to take this into account when you see the results. But many of the people who responded to the survey have traveled to many places in the world. So we think the results are quite representative. Next slide, please. Yeah, so what we found was actually, in terms of perception, that plastics were the most commonly seen types of waste in mountains. And we actually got some nice photos from some of the respondents. And here you can see typically this was a photo in Spain, what someone would pick up in the mountains. So you got ski goggles, this is probably a ski area, plastic bottles, cigarette packets, and then a lot of small wrappers for chocolates and things like that. Next slide, please. We asked also where is waste seen on the mountains, and it's seen everywhere basically where people walk. It's quite encouraging in a way to see that actually there are specific areas where waste ends up, and this is of course where people perhaps stop for rest or where in the car park along the route. And so I think this is a very positive sign that in sort of touristy mountain areas we can actually quite easily target where to have cleanup efforts and education efforts. Next slide, please. Sorry, could you go one back? Yeah, and so we actually asked all the survey respondents what they thought were the most interesting, most important measures to tackle this problem. And an overwhelming 90% said that adoption of the principles of take in, take out, or leave no trace was very important. Second comes more education on the impacts of litter, and third, looking at sustainable alternatives. And in terms of the responsibilities, I think there was quite a majority that said that individuals actually are very, 1 minute, okay. Individuals have to have responsibility, and this actually varied by region. So I think in Asia, for example, the role of tourism and trekking associations was much higher. And I think that's because actually when perhaps tourists go in the Himalayas, they're often accompanied by a trekking association, so they feel they should play a larger role. Next slide, please. So just to finalize, and a few key points, a few key takeaway points. I think in terms of volume, really, we should be looking at cities in mountains. That's where most people live. That's where most people consume. Cities consume generally more higher levels of plastic waste than rural areas. So this is really an area we should be focusing on in terms of absolute volumes of waste. The ability to manage waste is closely linked to a country's income level, and mountain regions are closely linked to lowlands through river systems. And so what happens in the mountains goes down to the lowlands. Waste is also a pervasive issue in remote regions. Plastic waste is most commonly observed waste, and there are some clear calls for action, I think, that the mountaineering community has given. So I'll leave it there, and thank you.
Thank you very much, Björn, for painting this global picture. You also see a slide with the publications that were recently published on the topic of waste-free mountains. They're all available outside, so if you're interested in a printed copy, please take it along. Also, again, Björn already mentioned some of the solutions. We invite you to write down your solutions for waste-free mountains and put it in the solution box, which is at a table in the end. Thank you very much. Now we move to our next speaker who joins us virtually. His name is Jost Dittkrist, he is a program manager with the Secretariat of the Basel, Rotterdam and Stockholm Conventions and an expert on plastic pollution and also plastic pollution in or tackling plastic pollution in remote and mountainous areas. Jost, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Ansgar. And indeed, it's a great pleasure to be with you, even just virtually, unfortunately. I'm actually greeting you from Rome, where we have a conference right now, actually tackling various chemicals, some of which may also end up in the mountains. Because as you may know, and that's one of the first points I wanted to mention, many chemicals travel long distances, and then in the end they are disposed in the mountains through plastic rain, for example, as we call it, through microplastics. And the next time that you take a ski trip, maybe think twice about the ski wax you are using, because you might be bringing chemicals such as PFAS into the mountains. So that's just a word up front, because it's quite closely linked to the conference I'm attending here in Rome. But yeah, getting to my presentation, I really wanted to, Björn did a great job outlining already some of the key issues we are facing. So now I wanted to talk very briefly about, okay, so what can we actually do about this? Next slide, please. So basically, we put together this diagram to understand at a very simple level, because I think it's very important to identify solutions, to first identify, okay, what are the problems, what are the drivers of both waste in general, but plastic waste in specific, with regard to the issues that we face in mountains. And some of the topics were already mentioned, but I really want to emphasize again here the findings we analyzed really suggest that tourism is a major factor that is driving pollution in the mountains. I mean, we had a famous example where a study in the Carpathians found that the annual per capita plastic consumption went from 1 kilogram in 2012 to 20 kilograms per capita in 2015, so within 3 years. And that happened in a time when the local population stayed essentially the same, but the tourist population multiplied. So it really shows the large impact that tourists have on waste, and in particular plastic waste in mountains. So there's that. Then there's also what Björn already mentioned, the economic issue. Many of the areas that are struggling in developing countries, in mountainous regions, don't have the resources, the financial capacity, the human resources, etc. And then, of course, there's some natural challenges, right? I mean, the remoteness, the natural conditions that some of these regions may face. So all of this combines really to create a very specific situation where mountainous areas, especially in remote regions and especially in developing countries, face a series of challenges. And eventually what this diagram shows is how these challenges then in the end lead to things such as open burning of the waste, which really is to be avoided because the toxic fumes that are released, but generally releases to the environment of plastic. And eventually this unavoidably has then an effect on human health and the environment. These colored dots that you see on the diagram, actually the numbers, you can ignore them, but what they represent is that, and these are just some examples, that at each of these places in this logic diagram, there are intervention points for action. So we can take action to break this cycle, and we can do that in many different ways. And depending where we do that, we will get different effects, but we can really choose different intervention points. And I will give you some examples of that. Next slide, please. And of course, the best way, and this is what the waste hierarchy teaches us, the best way to tackle waste is to not created in the first place, right? So we looked at all kinds of interventions that we found from across the world. We did a survey and we categorized them. And one category we came up with was policy. And some of the nice examples we found we're presenting here. And for example, in Himachal Pradesh in India, they banned the use of certain single-use items such as plastic carry bags and cutlery, and thus were able to really drastically reduce the amount amount of plastic waste. So this is a classic case of prevention, right? And then what I really liked in various regions, they did this in Nepal, but also in Tanzania, in the national parks, basically, they have a trash in, trash out system where through different means, they basically, for example, through a deposit that you have to leave, they really incentivize, let's put it that way, not force, but incentivize the people to come back with the waste that they bring into the mountain. Next slide, please. Then, of course, another really important aspect is infrastructure, right? I mean, even in remote mountainous regions, we need the infrastructure to collect and transport the waste. Very often, local recycling facilities are missing, so we need to be smart in these areas in terms of how to collect and then how to transport the waste. And again, we found some interesting examples, some of which are also featured in this policy brief. For example, in Kazakhstan, where a full life cycle infrastructure system was built with various trucks and collection sites, etc. And also a very exciting example, I'm not sure really fits the case of infrastructure, but in a way it does, because there was some recycling involved. In Peru, they recycled 1 million plastic bottles. It was in the Andean highlands into 13,000 ponchillas, which is basically like a bag that looks a bit like a ponchilla for children. So I found that a really nice example. Next slide, please. Then, of course, financing is absolutely critical. I mean, we already mentioned the lack of finances for many mountainous areas in developing countries in particular. So, of course, there's a range of options: extended producer responsibility, deposit return schemes, fees, taxes, fiscal incentives. And one example was in Italy, where they used tax incentives for households to separate the waste. And this was highly successful, actually. Another more small scale, but no less effective intervention was done in Nepal, where used plastic bottles could be, when they were picked up by somebody, they could be exchanged for one rupee. So really given an incentive for people to help clean up. Next slide, please. And then, of course, outreach. We cannot do without it, and it remains critically important. And here again, we have just a few examples. For example, in Switzerland, where they had various campaigns, and this is really just one of them, putting up boards in various resorts. The Swiss Alpine Club did a lot of campaigns, especially in the huts, really to educate people and to ensure that the waste they bring, they really also bring back. There's also the UIAA Mountain Protection Award. My colleague Carolina can talk more about that perhaps later if there's time. Also the Ultra Trail Mont Blanc. Again, this was an example of prevention, right? Not using waste in the first place. So basically they decided not to use disposable cutlery, etc. So as always, this is the most efficient way of dealing with waste. It's cheaper, it's more effective than creating the waste and then dealing with it afterwards, right? Next slide, please.
Jost, sorry to jump in. You have 1 minute left. Thank you.
That's exactly what I needed. All good. That's perfect, because this is actually my last slide. So no, I just to wrap it up, actually, what I wanted to say is that we need action really at the local level, at the national level, at the regional level, and at the global level. I mean, everybody needs to be involved. The municipalities at the local level, park administrations, and so on. At the national level, we need, of course, also the policy framework, the financing framework. I mean, the municipalities cannot do it by themselves. We need instruments such as the Alpine Convention, and last but not least, we also need the global instruments, such as the Basel Convention, for example, which regulates plastic waste in various ways, the Stockholm Convention, and of course also global partnerships such as the Mountain Partnership. So I hope I stayed within the time, Ansgar, and thanks so much for the opportunity to share a few words. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jost. A round of applause. Thank you. And as Jost mentioned, a lot of these examples are also part of the policy brief that is launched today and together with the Mountain Partnership under the International Year of Mountains. So we will make sure to distribute this policy brief widely. Now to our next speaker, also joining us online at a very late hour. I think she needs no introduction because she has been very present already. Carolina Adler is the Executive Director of the Mountain Research Initiative, and she also has another hat, that she wears now as president of the Mountain Protection Commission of the UIAA. Carolina, great to see you, and over to you.
Thank you very much, Ansgar, and good to be back, this time indeed with my second hat, which is with the International Climbing and Mountaineering Federation. And within that institution, I am the president of the Mountain Protection Commission. And I'm here wanting to mention just a few things about how we engage in the advocacy for our waste-free mountains through projects such as the Mountain Protection Award that we share in the support with the Bali Peak Outlook Foundation. I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a moment. Next slide, please. Yes, so for those of you who are not aware of the UIAA, this was founded in 1932. It connects over 90 member associations and federations. These are mostly alpine clubs, so your local mountaineering or climbing club may well be a member of the UIAA in 67 countries around the world. And mountain sustainability is really at the core of one of the many commitments that the UIAA subscribes to. And one of those commitments is, of course, through sustainability by establishing the Mountain Protection Commission in 1969. And it promotes key activities such as the Mountain Protection Award, as I mentioned, in collaboration with member federations, their communities, very important to recognize and acknowledge them as well, and through the partnerships with key sponsors that are motivated also to make a difference. And in this case, we are proud to be sponsored by the Bali Peak Outlook Foundation, who subscribe also to the values that we want to promote through this award. Next slide, please. So since 2013, the Mountain Protection Award has now promoted and created price incentives to showcase over 140 projects that are led and promoted by the mountaineering community in mountain areas around the world. So we are very proud and excited to see that mountaineers, although they do, of course, visit the mountains and engage in recreation, they are also interested in making sure that mountain communities and the ecosystems are also not harmed. So this is very important to acknowledge the motivation that they carry here. And this year, we've had a total of 16 projects active in 15 countries in 4 continents that have been nominated for the award. And we're very much looking forward to the UIAA General Assembly, which takes place on the 29th of October, just in a month's time over in Banff, Canada. So the announcements of this year's winners will be made as part of a public event alongside the Banff Mountain Film Festival. So we're very excited about that. So please do join us and have a look at that website to get more details about how to follow that award ceremony. Next slide, please. And here I would like to share just a clip from our partners, the Bali Peak Outlook Foundation, who will tell us a little bit more about what motivates them to engage with projects such as this with the UIAA.
The Sherpas quite literally draw their identity from the mountains. Having lived here for so many centuries, even our genetic code is altered. So the mountains are a part of us, we are a part of the mountains. In 2019, Bali and ourselves, we partnered up and we cleaned from base camp to the summit of Mount Everest. In 2020, we came up with the idea to clean up all the base camps of all the 8,000 meter mountains in the Himalayas.
टुरिस्ट नै नआएपछि ट्रेकिङ एक्सपिडिसन सेवा सबै ठप्प भयो। यस्तो परिस्थितिमा पनि बालीले सफाई अभियान चलाएकोमा हामीले सोचे जस्तो नभए पनि एउटा राम्रो काम गर्ने अवसर पाएको छौं।
Everest is more crowded and dirtier than it was ever before. I definitely believe we can always find a balance between economic activities, tourism, and the environment.
For the Sherpa people, the mountains are the abodes of the gods, and spiritual places have to be kept pure.
While the whole world is in lockdown, I think it's nice for them to know that there are others like us out here in the middle of nowhere cleaning up our planet. I think there would be many people who take inspiration or at least get some motivation and would like to do the same as soon as this crisis is over.
Thank you. Next slide, please. And just to close, just to reiterate that the mountaineering community, which is federated through the UIAA, collecting or more or less connecting more than 3 million people around the world, is a very good, important constituency to take into account, particularly through the projects and advocacy efforts to reduce waste in mountains. And it's very important to recognize their efforts. And I would like to also close by mentioning something that Elder Mary Jane Johnson made in her earlier interventions during the earlier panel. Is important to be aware of not only if and when you recreate, but how you recreate. And this is precisely one of the key things that the UIAA is very keen to instill and support through the Mountain Protection Award. Thank you all very much.
Thank you very much, Carolina, and thanks to the UIAA for all the work you do. And it's great to see the efforts and lengths that mountaineers go to ensure waste-free and clean mountains. Before going to our panel, we have a video from Munir Ahmed, who wanted to be in person at this meeting. Unfortunately, this did not work out, so he shared a video from his native Pakistan and their efforts for waste-free mountains.
My name is Munir Ahmed. I'm Executive Director, Development Communications Network, DevCom Pakistan, and also founder of Pakistan Mountain Festival, Pakistan Mountain Pride Awards, Pakistan Mountain Youth Parliament, and Pakistan Mountain Ambassadors. We started working on environmental issues in way back 2002 on the occasion of International Year of Mountain. As you know, we have 3 highest mountain ranges in Pakistan: Himalaya, Hindu Kush, and Karakoram. They have their own, environment where high altitude mountain expeditions come in, and they have their own impact on the mountains and communities as well, and on the ecosystems and mountain resources as well. And besides that, we have also timber mafia and housing mafia and stone crushing. These are major issues that we are facing, and they have destroyed the environment. And the recent flood, on the one hand, was the impact of climate change, but the local bad governance and the issues that we have created at the local level, added more to the calamity. And if we had not stopped the waterways, and we have not, wiped off the green belts around the rivers, or we have not dumped our waste into the natural streams and rivers, the scene could have been different. Pakistan is one of the fast growth rate of population, and to accommodate the population, we are destroying all the natural resources around us. In the mountain areas, most of the lands belong to the local communities, and to earn livelihood, they are into tourism business or the restaurants and the hospitality business. So they have no idea about what they are doing with their own natural resources and their habitats where they are living in. So we need to create. And one more thing that is we lack sustainable urbanization mechanisms and sensitization among the people. And there are regulations, but they are not implemented. We need to do we need to take care of the legislation and implement it in that and spirit. The high altitude mountains are also the dump of waste. Recently, Central Krakow National Park Directorate had a cleanup campaign of K2 only, and they collected more than 2,000 tons of solid waste, including cans, ropes, tents, and so. And that's very strange that only one mountaineer paid $200, and they can take 100 Sherpas or the local staff with them, and they all create mess over there. Perhaps the authorities need to increase the expedition fees, and besides that, the entry fees into the Central Krakow National Park. Those Sherpas, after the Nepali Sherpas are coming in the last some years, they have created more mess. They are unfortunately very environment unfriendly, and besides the mountaineers, they are also not paying heed to it because they are not liable or responsible, and they have there is no mechanism of fine on the mountaineers or the mountain expeditions, or like there is no restriction on bringing the people in the national park. I think there shall be some waste management awareness campaigns, sensitization, and community awareness and ownership of their natural resources. And there should be fee on the domestic tourists entering in the tourist destinations in the mountain areas. At the moment, they are free to come over there. There is no fee on it. So such kind of practices, I think, putting some price on the mountain ecosystems and the services would help conserve natural resources in the mountains. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you very much, Munir. This was pre-recorded because I think it is 3 a.m. right now in Pakistan, but he also mentioned many of the topics that Jost already referred to, such as policy, funding, and outreach activities from a Pakistani perspective. Now it's my pleasure to turn to the offline and online panel. We have true experts and leaders in waste-free mountains with us. We already learned about tourism as a main source for pollution in mountainous areas. We are in a very touristic area, and it's a pleasure to welcome Cathy Hall, who is director of the solid waste director for Pitkin County, which is where we are. She manages the solid waste center in this mountain community with the landfill, commercial compost, recycled transfer, and diversion programs. She has 29 years of experience, and she told me earlier she loves trash. So over to you. Cathy, I would like to ask you, you manage the waste in this county in Aspen, including Aspen, which is a tourism destination in mountains. Can you share some facts and figures how mountain tourism influences the amount of waste and how you manage it? Thank you.
Can you hear me? Okay, this is on. I do manage the Pitkin County Solid Waste Center. All of the recycling trash that's generated here, hopefully compost, food waste, will be going to my facility, not my facility, the county's facility. We're located about 7 miles outside of Aspen. So if you had a chance to leave Aspen, we're just straight down on Highway 82. But yes, we are affected greatly by the tourism of mountain community here. The population of Pitkin County is around 20,000 people. During high tourist seasons, in the summer, and the ski seasons, particularly around Christmas and New Year's Day, that population doubles. So it's interesting to note that in the US, we generate about 4.5 pounds of trash per person per day. When these high tourist seasons come in, trash per person in the Pitkin County area jumps up to 12 pounds per person per day. It's huge. I don't know why when we go on vacation, we generate so much trash. A lot of that is food waste. As Ansgar mentioned, we do collect recycling. We don't process recycling here. We're in a remote mountain community, so there's these challenges of that. So we collect the recycling. We're a transfer center. I'm sure most of you probably flew into Aspen, but our recycling gets loaded up onto a semi-truck and hauled all the way to Denver. It's a 190-mile one-way trip. It costs the county and the landfill $220 a ton to get recycling down to processing. We don't charge people $220 per ton. That is generated through trash, the trash disposal fees. So it's highly subsidized. So we deal with a lot of trash, a lot of tourism. The landfill currently, as we sit right now, only has about 8 years of life left. If you've worked in the solid waste industry, 8 years is not a lot of time. In Pitkin County, we were talking at lunch, the average house in Pitkin County is $12 million. There will not be another landfill in Pitkin County. So we are hypersensitive to waste diversion. Currently in 2021, we were able to recycle 40% or divert waste. 48% of that waste we kept out of the landfill, which is a tremendous accomplishment considering most everything that's recycled, again, has to go to Denver. So we're really, really proud of that.
Thank you, Cathy. And if time allows, we'll come back with another question. Maybe from a local perspective now to a very international perspective, it's my pleasure to introduce Angela Hawse, who is the president or chair of the American Mountain Guides Association. She was the 6th woman in the US to be an IFMGA certified mountain guide. She has traveled all over the world in high altitude areas and knows the mountains probably maybe like no one else in this room. So Angela, my question to you is, you've traveled to mountain ranges around the world. How have you perceived the waste problem in these mountains, and where do you encounter the biggest problems, and what are, in your view, the causes of this?
Thank you. And I just wanted to thank you for the opportunity to participate here. And I so appreciated the previous presentation, and all the insights there were phenomenal. And I also want to recognize Mary Jane's comment that there should be a seat up here for the mountains. I think that's critical moving forward, that we have a seat for the mountains, and the mountains are free. And I think that might be one of the biggest problems, because in my experience traveling all over the world in the mountains, the problems come because people aren't accountable for what they do in the mountains. And it's very sad. Sometimes that's not always the case. There's a lot of people that really care, like all of us here. I live in Southwest Colorado. Welcome to our beautiful state for those visitors here. I'm so glad this is being held here. My home is on the land of the Ute people, and my mountain range is the San Juans, but like Angela said, I've traveled all over the world, and I'm a high altitude mountaineer. I'm a professional mountain guide. I've been doing this for 35 years, and I'm definitely part of the problem with pollution and the things that we're seeing in the mountains, but I'm also a big part of the possible solution with my community of mountain guides. We have an intimate knowledge of the mountains, and I also appreciated the former conversation about how do we know the mountains? Is it on paper? Is it through our feet, through our eyes, all these things? And mountain guides have intimate knowledge of mountains, both locally and internationally, the places we go. And a lot of the times we spend a lot of time in one place. So in terms of climate change and changes to pollution and impacts, we see that probably more than anyone in the high mountains does, because we're exposed to it year after year, decade after decade. And I've seen tremendous change in the mountains. I was on an Everest expedition in '98, which was 2 years after the tragedy that really started the craze of guiding the higher peaks of the world and guiding on Everest. And it was relatively quiet when I was on the mountain, and I knew the waste problem from previous expeditions was a big problem. And one of the things I did is I raised money to pay our Sherpa team to bring down waste off of the mountain. And they brought down oxygen bottles, and they brought down like 2,000 kilos of garbage from the higher camps. And we paid them for that, so there was incentive. And there's a great model there that doesn't need to be reinvented, where we can pay people, local people, to help incentivize bringing down some of the problems. And you know, I like to think that mountaineers aren't just haphazard and tossing waste all over the place. Some are, most aren't. A lot of times it's a matter of survival, of, you know, beating the weather and getting down safely, and you can only carry what you need for survival on your pack. And it's these past expeditions, like the one Carolina shared with us, that go through and clean up the mountains and make them more pristine. In my experience, one of my focuses when I was on this expedition, I did it as part of my master's degree in international mountain conservation, was looking at the impacts that mountaineering expeditions have in the valleys that they trek through and the communities that they trek through on the way to base camp. Because really the garbage in the high mountains is relatively inert, at least we used to think so. And it's the impacts down valley of us traveling through and using extensive use of resources that are already minimal that have led to so many problems. And, you know, pollution is an eyesore for privileged Western folk, but for the locals that have to deal with it and live with the environmental contaminants that come with them and all the aftermath that doesn't go away, it's a real problem. And the 8,000 meter peaks, the seven summits of the world have certainly become so much more popular. And it's really the villages along the way that are being impacted by the pollution that comes as a result of getting onto the mountain, and then later what comes downstream. One of the things that is very interesting and quite frightening here locally, we have a Center for Avalanche and Snow Studies in the San Juans that has studied dust on snow for years. We live right next to the Colorado Plateau. We get prevailing westerly winds. It deposits dust on our snowpack, which leads to extreme early runoff. And this year they discovered microdust in the snow that has been blown from wherever it's decomposing. And so that's a real sobering thing, that is something that's gonna turn our mountains as water towers of the world into real problematic drinking sources for ourselves and wildlife downstream. I don't know, do I have an opportunity to say one or two things I would appreciate, I think we could look at plastic bottles, obviously, we all know are the worst, and it's because there's a lack of clean drinking water, and that's not only for visitors, it's for the locals. And if we could figure out how to use the power of the UV to just make drinking water pure in the mountains for everybody, that would eliminate a lot of problems with plastic. And also, I just want to echo engaging youth and engaging our resources that we have. Mountain guides are some of the best stewards of mountain areas in the world, and we're very underutilized in that regard. And we have a lot of inspiring stories that can that can move youth, and we have a lot of ability to get youth engaged locally. So I'll just end it with that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Angela. Very inspiring words, and also to know where one is rooted, what are your home mountains, and then appreciate the possibility to visit other mountain communities. We have a few minutes left, and with the kind request to have a short reply. Björn, you're an expert in the area of waste-free mountains, and just listening to the inputs and also the presentations, there is a big problem of waste and pollution and plastics. We saw plastics are the main waste in mountains. What are, based on your experience, some low-hanging fruits for waste-free mountains? What should we do first?
I had an answer that was prepared, all sorts of different initiatives, but I think Jost and the others talked to some very nice initiatives at the local and municipal level. So I won't repeat that, but I think what hasn't been mentioned is this upcoming global agreement on plastics. And actually, I would, if there's any governments, mountain governments, representatives in the room, is really to engage in this process. It's actually it's a low-hanging fruit because it's a time when the governments are actually negotiating through this international negotiating committee. There's something called a high ambition coalition. Some interesting politics around this agreement already. There's a divergence of countries. US actually is going one way, Norway, Rwanda, a couple of others are going in another direction, but all with the aim of reducing plastics. And one of the aim is really to reduce supply. And Angela, you mentioned microplastics, and I think we need to view mountains as part of the global system, and some things just can't be. A lot of things can be done at a local level, but some things just can't. And actually, this global agreement, possible areas will be to reduce the supply and also to develop minimum standards for plastics. And developing minimum standards will actually raise the value of plastics and hopefully kickstart a much more circular economy and reduce the input of constant virgin plastics coming into the system. So I think that's really somewhere where the governments and civil society can engage in, and I think that's a low-hanging fruit actually. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yeah, we will do a final applause as well for everyone. Now, Carolina, I see you're still on the screen. Thanks for staying with us. Maybe I just ask you for some final reflections, also acknowledging that you represent the MRI, which is the research and science community. So also if you want to share a few words on the importance of data and monitoring, and yeah, with the kind request to be short. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ansgar. And just wanted to say a quick hello to Angela. It's so great to hear and see you again after so many years. In terms of a closing statement, all I can say is that from the UIA's perspective, one of the things that we want to underscore is the value of partnerships. We would not be where we are now if it wasn't for the support of research organizations, institutions such as the Mountain Partnership, and also donors and sponsors who are looking to support and engage with those that are looking to also inspire action on the mountain. So it's very important to acknowledge the powerful prospect that we have if we engage and foster partnerships. And this is one of the key topics that is raised in the policy brief as well. So this is key to acknowledge. And from the Mountain Research Initiative's perspective, indeed, mountain researchers are also engaging more and more in research activities to understand better how the impacts of microplastics and other types of waste are affecting mountain ecosystems and water supplies. But increasingly now, and I think also very important, is to acknowledge the role of monitoring and evaluation practices to monitor just how well waste minimization measures are in fact working or not working. And for this, we would also like to encourage the prospect of engaging mountaineers and mountain research communities together through projects such as citizen science, to collect that sort of data that would be very difficult for a single individual scientist to set up a live experiment on the mountain to collect data of that sort. And we need also the engagement with local communities to understand from their perspective whether these measures are also working to make their living spaces sound and livable as well. Right. So this monitoring and evaluation prospect of how things are working is one of the key areas that we will look to foster and promote. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Carolina. Now I'm also aware of this big clock here ticking. We started a few minutes late, so I'll ask everyone just with 2 sentences maybe for closing remarks for waste-free mountains. So first, Jost, from the Basel and Stockholm conventions, maybe 2 sentences on how you help to protect mountains and keep them waste-free.
Right. Normally, I would love to start again by emphasizing, because I think it's so key, the individual responsibility, because again, and that's my other point, it's the prevention part in the waste hierarchy, which is the most effective. So let's all focus on that. But then what I want to say is that it's actually not really left to the individual, because we as a community, we have the duty to build an enabling environment that actually allows the individuals then to take that responsibility, right? And in that regard, what is really critical are global instruments, national instruments, and as it happens, in my view also, well, this is where I work, the Basel Convention plays a critical role in that regard with the plastic waste amendments. I mean, we're making good progress in reducing the generation of waste, but also improving the control of transboundary movements of plastic waste. And in the end, this will also trickle down in one way or another to the mountains, not least because we also have a few projects in Peru, in North Macedonia now, other countries coming up, pilot projects in mountainous areas. So I hope that, you know, we find that match between the global action that is needed, including through such global partnerships, and the local action.
Thank you so much for sharing this, and also welcome to the BRS Secretariat as a member of the Mountain Partnership.
Thank you very much.
2 sentences, and I will keep track if it's 2 sentences, on how we keep our mountains waste-free. Cathy.
Okay, so I am a big believer in not generating waste to begin with. So on our personal level, even when we're traveling or even when we're at home, reduce, reuse, refuse, and then recycle. So.
Great, thank you. And before giving the final word to you, Angela, a last reminder for the solution box. So we ask everyone to provide input on solutions for waste-free mountains. We will use it for an article and maybe also distribute through the Mountain Partnership. Yeah, and input to the Mountain Partnership advocacy and work we do all together on how to keep our mountains waste-free. And now, final words to you, Angela.
Thank you. My ideas are not going to be very popular, but I think they'd be quite effective, putting a moratorium on visitation in some of the world's most popular mountains. For example, if we put a moratorium globally on the world's 7 summits for 1 year, I think that would make a big statement that we mean business, and then we could do big cleanups on those mountains. So when we let people back in, we charge a hefty fee that's going to pay for all the infrastructure that comes with training that'll go on during that year of moratorium for the local people to put the processes and the facilities in place to support sustainable mountain tourism in these communities.
Great, thank you very much. And we are around if you have questions. Thank you.